Welcome to Legal Candy, your go-to for the sweet secrets of law as we sit here and unwrap them together. I am attorney Candace Colucci with the Colucci Law Group. Thank you for joining us. And we are here today with MK, our content writer and expert in all things now law, criminal, trials, property damage, all those goodies. And so we are here on our part 2 of talking about the Casey Anthony trial. So if you didn't join us, I'll give you a little overview. We have kind of been going back in time and looking at some of the famous cases that took place to kind of unwrap them and really talk about what happened during the trial that led to the outcomes that took place that everybody had talked about. And so if you recall, Casey Anthony's trial was riveting and deeply controversial legal saga that captivated the nation in 2011. Casey Anthony was a young mother from Orlando, Florida. She was thrust into the spotlight under the darkest of suspicions, the murder of her 2-year-old daughter, Caylee Anthony. The world felt that death. Everybody felt really connected to it, I being one of them at the time. The child's disappearance happened in June of 2008 and shocked the world because the world started searching for this little girl, while the entire time we come to find out is that this mother, Casey, who was acting like she did know where her child was at. She spent 31 days from the date her child went missing, not even looking for her child. It was the grandmother, Cindy Anthony, and the grandfather, George Anthony, who actually started the search for the child. And it all was sparked after 31 days of this child being missing, while Casey Anthony was living her best life in Orlando, partying it up, getting a tattoo. She abandoned her car, which we know exactly why she abandoned her car was because the car smelled like death. The car was found in an impound lot. The parents are the ones who went and picked it up. And based on that, they called 911 in fear of the fact that their granddaughter was missing. And now they found their daughter's car that smelled like death. This unraveled to another trial of the century. I mean, everybody can recall where they were at when that trial started, when that trial ended. And so now we're going to take you through actually what took place during the trial against probably the world's most hated mother. I think that's really who she became during that time. And the unfortunate outcome of that case ended up being that Miss Casey Anthony walked out of that jail with just minor misdemeanor charges, unfortunately.
Serving 10 days.
Yeah, and it was a horrific situation. So just to give you our legal disclaimer so you know, the content shared on Legal Candy is for informational purposes and should not be taken as legal advice. It doesn't create an attorney-client privilege. When you're watching this either on the radio, podcast, YouTube, anywhere, just let us know if you have any questions or concerns. You can reach out to Colucci Law Group at 727-733-9438 or email us at coluccilawgroup.com. If we cannot help you, we will point you in the right direction of somebody that can. All the information is gathered today from public sources, so if there's anything that may be not factual, you can please look it up yourself. We are not guaranteeing that everything that we found on the internet is 100% legitimate, but we tried to do our best. So let's get right into the trial that takes place. So we had already talked about during the trial, the very first thing that they had went through really was trying to make sure that Casey Anthony was going to get a fair trial. They had already outsourced the jury pool, so they pulled the jury selection from about 2 hours here in Clearwater and brought them to Orlando to try that case. And then also, the original judge was recused from that case, and another judge ended up taking over in his place. And I think I just saw from the judge, he was talking about that he remembers where he was and when he was asked to take over this case. So it's Judge Belvin Perry, and he was an attorney and then also served on the bench as a judge, and really, in my opinion, is a phenomenal judge and did a great job during that trial, kind of wrangling everyone together. Seemed very fair and impartial. It doesn't always happen that way with judges. They are human beings, but I think that Judge Perry did a good job. I saw him in an interview and he just said that he was at an event, I think in Tallahassee, when he got the phone call from the chief judge that had said, listen, the judge that's on the bench right now, there's been a motion to recuse him and he's willing to step down. Are you willing to take over the case? And he said, I will. And so he does take over the case. So some of the things that take place is that the prosecution's responsibility and job is now to prove the elements of this case beyond all reasonable doubt. And we really try to stress that that is a very high burden, but there are times when the jury, I believe, are confused at how high that burden is and really think that all of our doubts need to be erased, and it's not. The word reasonable doubt is so important, and I think it becomes very pivotal in this case because the jury seems to be demanding, I want you to get rid of all of my doubt, any doubt that I potentially have, when really, if you're looking at it from a reasonable perspective, there's only so much that you could have gathered from the facts in this case. And the fact that they walk away thinking that Casey Anthony is not guilty of murder, okay, but she's also not guilty of child abuse, is kind of shocking. It's shocking to me. It was at the time. It still is now. I understand trial as a trial litigator. Graduated from Stetson Law. I specialize in trial litigation, and Stetson's team, the trial team, is the #1 in the country. So I've been trained extensively on trial. Now, looking at the case as a trial litigator, I get to go back and see some things that I believe were done potentially. And it's hard to say incorrectly because here's the thing. Some attorneys try cases very dirty, very, very dirty. And I believe one of the dirtiest things that takes place is during the opening statement. So after you have the jury selection, so they select the jury, it is a death penalty case. So there's 12 jury members opposed to 6. So there's 12 because the potential is death. And we'll talk about that because that you believe that's also, we hear from the juries that ends up being one of their sticking points of why they had a hard time finding her guilty. And so what happens during opening statement, and we've kind of talked about this before, is that you don't always know when you go to a jury trial, you have an idea of what the other person's case is going to be, what their theory is going to be, what their evidence that they're going to put on. You have an idea because you've done this entire discovery process during the time you've gotten ready for trial. So you know the witnesses that they're going to put on the stand. You've deposed those witnesses, so you know what they're going to say. You know what evidence, the documents that are going to be admitted. But there is always times that the other side can surprise you with what their theory is going to be. Because even though someone has done deposition, when they take the stand, they can potentially add new things they didn't talk about during the deposition, and that's okay. They're not supposed to lie, but they can change some of the things they're going to say. So you don't necessarily know what the other side's full case is going to be until the opening statement. And I remember watching this opening statement because the world was all sitting there going, what possibly could this woman's defense be? We've seen this woman lie. It's 2011 now. We have now known her since 2008, since her daughter allegedly goes missing. She lies to the police department about where she works. She lies to the police department that she dropped her daughter off at a Hispanic woman's apartment and that they were babysitting her. None of those people existed. She didn't work at Universal Studios. She lies that she had talked to her daughter recently.
She was looking for 31 days.
Lies that she had been looking for her while she was partying. Yeah. She sits in jail waiting while she's still lying, while the world's looking for this little girl who literally, when they finally find her body decomposing on the side of the road, wrapped in plastic bags and covered in a blanket, and with duct tape on her mouth and duct tape in different areas, and she's been decomposing for months. They're able to put back a timeline that they believe shortly after she goes missing in June of 2008, her body gets dumped shortly after, maybe a couple of weeks afterwards. So when they finally find it months later, it has been decomposing there on the side of the road. I think you said, what, 15 feet or?
19 feet.
19 feet from the actual road. She's in like a little ditch area, swamp area. It's just heartbreaking. This little girl's body, 2 years old, almost 3, is just sitting there decomposing. And so with that, the question of the world is, what is this woman's defense going to be? What is she going to say? And remember, she doesn't have to take the stand. As a criminal a defendant, you do not have to take the stand in your own defense, because the only person who has to prove anything is the state attorney. So your attorney representing you's job can be solely just to show that the state attorney doesn't meet the burden, that high burden, to charge you with these, to convict you with them, like saying, hey, this is not enough to find me guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in this case. And so that can be your entire defense. So you don't have to put on any witnesses if you don't want to. All you can do is just, your attorney can just be cross-examining their witnesses. Now, most of the time they're going to put on their own witnesses, but a lot of times they do not have their client testify, which it would be, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Casey Anthony was not going to testify. I mean, with all of the lies she had already said, if she took the stand, it wouldn't matter, because they would cross-examine her on every single lie. And it would open up a whole nother set of lies, because she now opens the door when she takes the stand to her credibility. So there was no intention of her taking the stand, and she doesn't take the stand in her defense. So when the opening statements happen, and Jose Baez, which is her attorney, he starts out, what he says, he has a whole theatrical, I remember he was like yelling at points in time. He's like reenacting what takes place. And what he says is, and keep in mind, by this time, we have watched, I mean, everybody feels connected to this case. Like everybody feels like they know this child. They know this little girl. I think everybody feels like you know what a 2-year-old, 3-year-old's like. You feel connected to this 2-year-old, 3-year-old. And then by now, you have seen the parents, which is the grandparents of the little girl, Cindy and George. You have seen them in interview after interview. You have seen them with search parties with the face of Kaylee Anthony on there, missing. Please help us find us. If you know anything about her, let us know. You have seen this for now so long. You've now watched all these videos of Casey Anthony in custody when she's nasty to her parents, doesn't care about her child's missing. She's very indignant about kind of everything that's being questioned to her. And you see her parents through this entire thing, devastated, crying. You never see Casey Anthony crying. I mean, you never see her before the trial. I think it starts to shed some tears at the trial. But you've seen these parents, Cindy and George, for years. That's who you feel. Your first empathy is for the baby, Kaylee Anthony. Your next one is for these grandparents that you know loved her, cared for her, took care of her. They are leading the search party for her, and they're devastated once her body is found. And one of the things is that right after the body is found and the autopsy report comes back and it has those horrible details of the actual status of the body, George Anthony, who is a retired police detective in that county, he actually makes a statement to the judge and says, please, can you not release the autopsy report until the trial? Because we have already been through enough. Those facts are so traumatizing. Can you please not release them yet? I mean, he's very involved in the process. They're very emotional about it. So by the time the opening statement starts, we have really been through it with this family, and we feel for anyone during that trial, we feel the most connected to really her parents. That's really the most connected. Her, the little girl we want justice for, and we feel so heartbroken for her parents. So the opening statement starts by Jose Baez, and the slap in the face that opening statement takes is just remarkable too. I couldn't imagine if I was the prosecuting attorneys sitting in that room and then listen to what he said. So he takes the stand, and what he says is, he goes, we're going to tell you what took place. And so you'll understand that what happened was Kaylee Anthony was a vibrant 2-year-old, and she loved the outdoors and she loved the pool. And here's a picture of her opening a sliding glass door. Here's a picture of her with her grandparents in the pool with her floaties on. And what happened on that fateful day was Casey Anthony wasn't paying attention. And Kaylee Anthony opened the door and went into the pool, and she drowned there. And when Casey Anthony awoke from her nap and looked frantically for her daughter, she finds her daughter floating on a pool, and she doesn't know what to do. She's devastated. And then, you know what happens? Her father doesn't help her in a way that a father should help. What he does is he starts screaming, and then Jose Baez starts reenacting this yelling that you're an inconsiderate parent, they're gonna blame this on you, you're gonna spend your life in jail. The whole defense is that he's the one who convinces her not to call the police, because he makes her feel like she's gonna be held responsible for this accident of a drowning of a child. And then the reason why Casey Anthony goes along with this plan and then allows the father to help her. I mean, just even saying it out of my, like, I remember the day that I remember listening to it going, you gotta be joking me. Because then she goes, they go further to say, then this ex-detective, okay, that his bright plan is that, you know what we should do? We should get rid of this body. And you know where we should put it? We should duct tape it. Then we should put it in a bunch of plastic bags. Then, you know where we should put it? We should just drive 2 blocks up the street. And you know what we should do? We should just roll down the window and toss this little baby onto the side of the road. That's literally what their defense is. And then they go on to say that not only is that their defense, but how can we justify all of these just salacious lies she's been telling to the world? Is we're going to say she's a victim of sexual molestation of her father and inappropriate touching and molestation of her brother, and that she has been taught to lie to everybody her whole entire life, and that she is the victim. Yeah. I just remember my heart stopping and me thinking, I can't even believe this lawyer. Like, I couldn't believe that is the story. Like, I'm an attorney, and I'm telling you what, I always tell my clients, no matter who I represent, I will always do what's right morally. I will never let anything pass my mouth that I don't believe in, that I can't stand behind. I don't care who I represent. So I've had clients before when I was doing criminal defense that would tell me stories, and I would literally look at their face and tell them, if you think that I'm going to go before a judge and tell that story, if I don't believe it, I'm not saying it. So you either have to get a new attorney, or we got to figure out what actually took place here, because it's not that.
And the jury, they found Jose Baez opposite of you. They found him very empathetic.
That's crazy.
Completely related to him. They found him the most empathetic person in.
It's crazy.
Yeah, the only one who expressed empathy.
Yeah. It was, and I think it's because for Casey. I think it's because he, first of all, as someone like we were talking about before, he is very interested, and I think, in the trial drama. Right. So there are attorneys who are really skilled in trial, and one of the, like, if you're reading trial books around that, there's two different schools of thoughts of how people try cases, but one of the major school of thoughts is that they believe that trials are an acting. It's a play that you do all of these different things. And I am not of that opinion. I don't believe it's a play, and I don't believe it's fake. I believe every single time that you try a case, everything with my soul is that I believe that this is taking place. I believe it's happened. Even before, when I tried cases as a student and we were trying cases all over the world, even then, I had told myself everything about this is legitimate. Somebody's life's on the line. These are true facts. So I'm not an actor. It's not when I do this, and which is funny because I've done acting classes. And when I was in those acting classes back in the day when I was younger, I did find out that there were attorneys who take acting classes. But I think that's just my school of thought is there's no need for me to act. Like, I only take cases that I believe in with my soul, that I can stand up there and I can tell a jury that this is what I believe took place. And this is what I believe is right or what I believe is wrong. So I think there was a lot of theatricals about how he presented the case. And ultimately, give credit where credit's due, is he did a good job calling into question all of the evidence the prosecution had and raising reasonable doubt every time you turned around. His response was, let's talk about the reasonable doubt. That's all he had. It is really all he had, because he didn't have, his story was really missing so many pieces of it. Mm-hmm. But the empathy you're talking about, that I believe that the jury was stating to, is that is what he did. He's like, I've got to show that I believe that she is a victim, that these things are real, whether they are or not. And also, I think that the jury, and I think that could have been what was lost on the prosecution side, was that I think that they were enraged. And when we talk about how a trial should go, is that you have to be really careful with having too many people on one side where their opinions they're indignant about it, right? And that's kind of how the prosecution were. They weren't soft. There wasn't anyone who was really soft about it, who was just like, they were angry about it. They were, and I get it. And I completely get it, because everybody knew, the world knew. And now you're here on a 33-day trial of literally trying to find her guilty of something everybody knows she was guilty of. It takes a lot of mental control to go, okay, we do know that, but how do we present the best case? And a lot of times, just like, as crazy as it sounds, if we're building the best team of attorneys, we try to get attorneys who have different personalities, who come across differently, you know? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it is very important, because a jury is so strict about the way that they're looking at things. It's not always reasonable how they see things. It is very much in a box, and it's very much like this is the impression. A first impression is the lasting impression for them. If they feel a certain way and it's hard to ever overturn something, a lie is a lie. If you lie about something, they think you're always a liar, which is why I was so shocked, because they hate liars. And Casey Anthony is the epitome of a liar. But what I think happened is that, absolutely right, I think the prosecution was so angry about it that they didn't really take that time to kind of come down and have somebody go, members of the jury, this little girl who was 2 years old was wrapped in plastic bags with duct tape over her mouth and a Winnie the Pooh blanket, and then was tossed on the side of the road like trash. And regardless of what's trying to be told here today, the person who's responsible for that there is no question about, is Casey Anthony. And all she's tried to do today is convince everybody that she is the victim. And that is the most devastating part here.
So narrative was dry.
It has to be more like, you really needed, and that's hard to come to when you're being so technically insulted by the other side of like all these defenses when you're like, we all know what happened here. Like, we all know what happened here. So I just remember I had a sick feeling in my stomach. I was so upset about their defense, and I just couldn't believe that the argument was going to be that her father was molesting her. Okay. And I think it's because we had been watching him for so long, but really we had also been watching her for so long on those jail tapes. And the person she always asked to speak to is her dad.
I know.
There was a moment when I remember she was on a video and they were only letting her they had really strict limitations on visitation, who could come and physically see her. And so she, right in front of her mom and dad, like the mom was like, well, you only get to see one person. And she's like, yeah, that's the reason why I asked to have dad be able to see me in physical. And there were so many times on the phone where she's like, just put dad on the phone. Let me talk to dad. Let me talk to dad.
It's
like
annoying me, Mom. Just
yeah.
You know?
And their relationship was, she was very much, and Judge Perry also pointed it out in post interviews, is he said, when you watch Casey Anthony in those jailhouse videos, she's not a victim and she's not subservient. Like he says, she was controlling both of her parents. Like it didn't come across at all that like she was ordering them around and they were like, yes, okay, no, we're sorry. Oh, do we upset you? We're so sorry. We're so sorry. While she's the one in jail and they're the ones out there trying to do everything they can for her, for the child. Like, and she's literally badgering them, being disrespectful to them while they're like, we're so sorry, honey. I mean, I remember when she tells her mom, just get off the phone. Let me talk to dad. And he gets on the phone and he's like, hey, honey. So yes, now we know a lot about, sexual assault and molestation from your family, is that just because she's asking for her dad or she's sweet with her dad doesn't mean he didn't molest her, understanding of that. But that's not the part that really got it for me. I would always hate to say, because of course, if somebody says they've been molested, you've got to take that, to heart. The part that was so unbelievable was not that she's molested, because, maybe she had been. It was the fact that anyone would believe that a detective, I think he had been a detective, this was the part that always just really got under my skin, was that George Anthony was a detective for 20-something years. Even if he was the worst detective in the world, doing it for 26 years is going to get you some knowledge. And if you think, number one, that he would have seen his granddaughter drown. Here's all the reasons why this is not plausible. Is because, number one, him being a detective, a police officer, they understand first aid and they understand drowning. And the way drowning works is, not that I'm a medical professional, but I will tell you, you can be unconscious for a very long time and call 911, and 911 can come and get you and bring you back to life. Sometimes they do have brain damage, but there are times when they're able to come back out of it. So the fact that you would think that he would find Kaylee drowning and not call 911 is insane, because he knows that he could potentially save her still, or he knows it's not in his hands to save her or not. It would be 911. You would do CPR until 911 came. You continue doing CPR, and he would have known that better than anybody, that there is a chance that this little girl could survive, even if you find her floating in a pool. And not to mention, there's no video cameras, so it's not like he could have ran back to his Ring camera and figured out, oh, well, she'd been in the pool for 45 minutes. He would have had no idea how long she'd been in the pool. So that's number one. He would have called the police. Number two is he's not going to then turn around to his daughter, okay, he's a detective, and go, you're going to go to jail for life. Like, as if he's never been involved in the police department. Like, as if he's never. Because here's what I'll tell you. As of then, and still as of now, I don't know a single case of someone who was charged and is sitting in jail for a child that got out of the house and drowned in a pool, because it happens, unfortunately, more than you could ever imagine. And in the 26 years that George Anthony was a detective or a police officer, he definitely knows cases of children who accidentally drowned in a family pool or a neighbor pool, any of those things, and they did not get charged criminally. So he would never turn to her and scream to her that she's going to go to jail for life. That's number two.
And wouldn't, if he called the police would have been able to ascertain that that's how she
100%.
died. That's her cause of death right there.
100%. So that's number two. Number three is, even arguably, if all the other pieces were true, even if they were, and he was like, listen, erase my 26 years of detective work. I think it's 26. For some reason that number's saying, erase my 26 years of detective work and pretend like I don't know anything about police officers besides maybe what I saw in Law and Order. And there's no way to save her, and you're going to go to jail for life. So now I need to protect you as my daughter. Even if that was the case, you then want me to believe that his best cover-up of this evidence was gonna be, let's drive a couple blocks and literally get out of the vehicle and take 15 steps into a swamp and just throw her body there? I mean, that's what he's learned? That is his best cover-up? No, please. The one thing I can tell you about him doing his job for long, and as a detective, mind you, it's different than a police officer. It's a detective. Like, his job is to uncover crimes in a detective level, which means to get all that evidence, unravel things, figure out potential cold cases, is to really figure out how they hid the evidence, what was their best defense, all these kind of things. That's what he specializes in. And the best thing he took from that was, you know what? We don't even need to bury this body. Just toss it on the top.
We need the poop blanket
just
with
rub
the
her a
sheets
couple
that are
times.
still at the house.
No one's gonna know. Like, it's just a couple blocks. They're never gonna search a couple blocks from our house. Like, you mean to tell me he had all the time in the world, mind you, also, because this allegedly took place in June of 2008, and they don't find her body or any of those steps till months later. So that means he wasn't even in a hurry to get rid of this body, arguably, and that's the best option he had. Members of the jury, nothing about that is reasonable. Not even a single thing. Even if you believed he was molesting his daughter, none of that is reasonable. And that, to me, as an attorney, was very heartbreaking. That I never believed a jury would believe any of that. And the fact that they did, to any degree, it believed anything other than the fact that this woman was guilty, was mind-blowing. And attorneys will tell you, and as a criminal defense attorney, as an attorney that I do civil cases too, I tell my clients all the time, I'm very confident in trial litigation. I can tell you I will give you the best defense, the best prosecution, like whatever side that I'm on at the time. I will give you your best advocacy. But here's what I can tell you. That every attorney will say that you will lose cases you should have won, and you'll win cases you should have lost. That's the way juries work, is because they are unpredictable. They're unpredictable of what will happen. We get a little bit of time in jury selection in order to pick these people, but it really comes down to fate. There's a huge part of jury selection that comes down to positioning of the actual jury member, where they're at when they sit. That even though we all get to have some say in it, we still only get to decide it by a small pool, depending on where they're sitting. So at the end of the day, if luck isn't on your side and you get a couple of the wrong people that are just have prejudice or whatever it is that they hid from us, it all goes wrong fast. So that was just some of the pieces to me that were so just shocking. Was the defense that they put on that made absolutely no sense to me. Now, what ends up winning this trial for them is, in my opinion, it's not that they had this great defense. That was a horrible defense. That is just, and yes, you've at least got some questions. I think whenever you have women on the jury, there's a high statistics. One in every, I think it's 4 women have been molested. I think it's like 1 in every 5 of those, or 3, 1 in every 3 of those, 1 in every 4 will have been from a family member. So when you have women on a jury, I think there was 5 or 6 women, you will more than likely, at least one of them has been molested. It's very unfortunate. So a lot of them will resonate with that. But I don't believe that that's what wins it for them, is that defense. It's not that. It is, unfortunately, the fact that they could not determine the cause of death, right? And so what was the quote? So the quote, our theme, because we talk about we love our theories and our themes. We have O.J. Simpson, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Those are great little taglines that go a long way in a jury trial. The jury will think about those things, and it kind of resonates in their head when they go back to that jury room. But it was something along the lines of, if you can't prove how someone died, then you can't convict them of guilt. You can't. Right. Yeah, you can't find how they died. You can't find them guilty. That was literally, by the time we get to the very end of the trial, that really morphs into what Jose Baez's defense is for Casey Anthony, is that they cannot determine a cause of death. So there is 30-something days of testimony. This trial goes on. There is 37 witnesses. This becomes one of those cases. It was very similar to O.J. Simpson's in that realm, because there was just a lot of discussion about experts, what experts were allowed, what experts are used. And so those are also ruled by the rules of evidence, is that we have a very high standard of who can be determined an expert for trial and what are they an expert on. And so we have these rules that says, there's certain qualifications, they have to have either experience, education, whatever they're trying to potentially utilizes needs to be acceptable by the community, depends on what year this is happening. There's a couple different standards. And it has to be a scientific kind of method. There's got to be some kind of test that they're potentially doing. So there's different actual requirements that allows an expert to actually testify. So this case ended up being, there was a lot of talk about, and this was a huge point for the prosecution's case, was all about this odor. The smell of the car was big for them. And it was, I think a lot of the elements of why it was big for them was because, and I think it became bigger. So I think they were trying to get in a specialist, which I loved this guy. The expert they were trying to have testify had never testified to this in Florida, had never been used before, that he was going to be an expert with smells. So he said that he was an expert with decomposing body. He's been studying it for 20-something years, and that he believed that he was qualified to testify that I smelt it, and therefore I can testify as an expert that this was the smell of decomposing body. And tons of people had testified, but he was going to be the expert. He had also tried, and this is one of the pieces I loved, that he tried to get into evidence and ended up not being allowed in, was that he had a device that allegedly could trap the air, because so her vehicle ended up getting impounded and became evidence. So they had it as evidence, and they kept it. The police department did. So it continued to smell like dead body. And so the testing method was that they were going to box, like literally capture the smell. And then the plan was to bring the smell to trial and then have the jury have to go back into a room and then open up the box for the jury. To me, it was, and I'll tell you, to Judge Perry too, it was just revolutionizing. Like, that's really what it is. It's just the future of evidence. That's what it potentially can be. We have the ability to potentially capture smells and then release them somewhere else. But it hadn't been used before, and that happens to be one of the prongs when you're trying to determine if this is admissible or not. Is has it been generally accepted in that community? Has it been utilized before? Which is kind of a catch-22. Is that if you're requiring it to be used before, and this is the first time, how does it ever get admitted into a court? So that concept didn't come in, and I think that would have been huge too. I think it would have been very moving for a jury. And they fought to try to get that in before, and then the judge said no. Eventually said no, that it couldn't come in, but this expert's testimony could come in, that he could testify that to the smell as an expert. And so what ended up becoming so important about that smell is that her defenses is that she didn't really have anything to do with dropping this body off. It really was her dad and, the ex-detective who made all these great plans, that it really was him. But if you believed that her car smelled like death, which wasn't even a question, her own mother said it, her father said it, it was just like, it was very obvious. She got a boyfriend, I think, said it. Like, everybody's saying this car smells like, they had a bunch of detectives, police officers who said that it smelled like death. There's no questions about it at all. That if you believed that it would directly conflict with her story, because now there's evidence that it was in her car, the body, that after whatever happened to Casey Anthony, she put it in her body and then at one point in time panicked and threw this body off the side of the road. So that's why it was so huge. But the case comes crumbling down, and this becomes really the biggest part, is that Dr. G takes the stand, and she's the one who performed the autopsy on Casey Anthony. Oh, I just remember when she was testifying, and she says that it was so unfortunate that the body had decomposed to the level that it was, because she does determine that she believes that, in her expert opinion, that it was homicide, but undetermined cause of death, but said it was homicide. And she really took, I believe this case was very personal to her. She's, it's very much the way she presented it during the jury was to, like, literally was telling the jury, listen guys, this little baby was found duct taped in bags, and then a heart sticker on this baby's mouth. And she tells the jury, there is no reason why a child should ever be in this state at all, unless somebody has murdered the child. Right. That's the only thing that would make sense. And so that's what she says. But she says, I cannot determine how she actually died. I can't tell you if she was, because the prosecution's kind of case was, and they weren't always very clear about it, was that they believed that she had been suffocated by the tape, or there had been chloroform used. So that's a huge piece of evidence that comes in several different times about the chloroform. That there was searching going on the home computer about how do you create chloroform, and then they found chloroform in the bed of Casey Anthony's decomposing freaking
and then the
car.
Defense said that it could have come from household cleaners. It could have come from bleach from the pool. So it didn't necessarily have to be that. They cast so much doubt.
Well, you really saw, for every expert, as we talked about before, is the sad part about experts is that science is not black and white. It's not at all. It really is very gray. And you can almost any type of science, if it's blood splatter, if it's like a lot of those things, you can have one witness, one expert who says it's this, while another expert says it's that, and it really is opinion based, and people want it to be white and black, and it really, truly, really isn't. So what takes place is that she ultimately says that she cannot determine how this baby died, and that really becomes the opening for the defense to go, listen, you can't determine how she died. So which means you cannot determine that beyond all reasonable doubt that this baby did not die from drowning. That the story that is being peddled by Casey Anthony is not true. And so that really became a huge sticking point for the jury when they go back to deliberate, is that the jury seems to be very, very obsessed with the fact that You can't tell me how she died, so it could be possible. And here was one of the things that Judge Perry said that is just one of those. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong during a trial when attorneys are just trying to do their best. There are small things that happen here and there that can change everything. And one of the things that takes place is us as attorneys, we have to determine the jury instructions. And the jury instructions are literally what gets read to the jury at the beginning of trial and at the end of trial. So they're really the rules of trial. And also it includes what the evidence, what the charges are. So it'll include, hey, this is first degree murder, and this is what you have to find in order to determine first degree murder. We have to prove that there was intent, premeditation, deliberation. Like, we have to prove all of these elements. So the jury instructions are really the rules for what the jury needs to follow. And also there'll be other things that potentially are specifically important to this case. Well, the jury instructions get agreed upon by both parties. We get together and we work on what those jury instructions are. If we have a disagreement, then the judge will make a determination on what he believes are the full jury instructions. Those pages are sometimes 60 pages long, 100 pages long, and the judge has to read every single word to the jury. So what Judge Perry said was, there are standard jury instructions, and those are the ones created by the Florida Supreme Court. And those are for real common things. But then there are special jury instructions, and those are things that are created over time that you really have to be a known litigator to know, hey, you need to add this in. And some of them we create on the fly. We say, listen, this happened. We want an instruction for this. Like, let's just say, I'll tell you, a perfect example is during this trial gets very dirty. And I'll say, Jose Baez, there's a lot of times the attorneys are really fighting it out. And there's a lot of times he violates law rules, the other side violates rules. But a lot of times that I saw when I was watching that Jose Baez were violating some of the rules of what we were allowed to say and not say. And so there's instances where we'll object to it and the judge will sustain that objection, meaning like, yes, it shouldn't have been said. And then we'll ask that the judge strike it from the record and please give a curating instruction to the jury, which means I want you to tell the jury what that means, that it's been stricken, which means you shouldn't think about it. So that may be a jury instruction that we want to add that reminds the jury that, hey, listen, there are times that things have been stricken from the record. What that means is you're not to contemplate that, talk about it. You're supposed to pretend like it never happened. So what Judge Perry said was, he goes, I had a special instruction drafted, all ready to go. And this happens sometimes, juries do this. And the special instruction was for the concept of that you as the jury do not have to determine cause of death. You do not have to determine cause of death in order to determine that this young girl was murdered and that her mother murdered her. You do not have to know exactly how she died in order to find her guilty of murder.
But yet that was so pivotal, though.
So I'll tell you what's so crazy is that Judge Perry says, I assumed that they were going to come to me, that at least the prosecution, right, would come to me and say, listen, Judge, because as an attorney, you try to anticipate all the things the other side's going to say. And based on that, you create your jury instructions to protect yourself. Even at the end of trial, 31 days, now new stuff comes out. You still get another opportunity to work on those jury instructions because another set of jury instructions get read to the jury right before they go back into the deliberation. So Judge Perry said, I was sure, based on what had all come out, that now we know there's no technical cause of death, that the prosecution was going to come to me and say, listen, Your Honor, we want you to add this special instruction for the fact that this jury needs to know that they don't have to determine cause of death. And he says, no one ever came to me and said it.
Wow.
And what happens is, unfortunately, unfortunately, that there's nothing that a judge can do. A judge isn't supposed to insert themselves into the case or any of those kind of things. And so he absolutely doesn't. So he doesn't just voluntarily add that jury instructions. It gets left out. And now, hindsight's 2020, is because what is one of the main reasons why the jury finds Casey Anthony not guilty is because why?
They didn't know how she died.
Yeah.
They didn't know.
And because
that is so wild.
Since they were not given that instruction, they felt that if they can't determine the cause of death, then she's not guilty. You know, how can you find someone guilty of murder if you don't know how the person died? But circumstantially, which is another way that we prove things in trial, sometimes we have direct evidence, and that's what was missing here.
And there was a lack.
You didn't really have direct evidence. What that means is they really didn't have a DNA. When they did this whole entire investigation of this decomposing site, there was no actual DNA evidence on Caylee Anthony. There was no fingerprints. There was none of that actually tied directly Caylee Anthony, because it had been there for so long. But they did find, I think, her hair fibers. Caylee Anthony's hair fibers were, I think, in the back of the mother's car, but there's other ways how you can say that had gotten there. So what they had is they didn't have direct evidence, they had circumstantial evidence. They had enough evidence that should have been enough for a jury to say, although we didn't see her murder her, we know with everything else that has taken place here that the only reasonable result is that this mother is responsible for this daughter's death. So that was a huge pivotal issue. And that is one of those things that become those small in a trial. Let me tell you guys, it is, I just got off of 3 weeks back-to-back trials, and I'll tell you, it's very mentally exhausting, physically exhausting. Your mind's going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to prepare for it. Takes years to prepare, but really get down and dirty with paperwork, questions, everything you need takes so many hours. So those are some things that sometimes do get overlooked as jury instructions. People forget about how important they are. And that was something insanely important in this case. The other thing that was pivotal was that they had made the decision that they were going to seek the death penalty, and they made that very clear to the jury. And so with the lack of evidence that became questionable, really, the lack of evidence and the evidence that ended up being called into question, the jury seemed to think that they had a hard time, even if they felt that she was responsible in some way, they didn't feel secure enough to find her guilty because they knew the punishment was death. And they did a good job kind of painting her out. I mean, she cried a couple times. She was wearing her hair back. And I think they said that when she came back one time,
blouse
she looked like a little girl. That always happens. But then I thought the interesting point is I was watching the trial again, and you can see during the trial at some point in time her chair gets lower. And that is a tactic too. It's a tactic to make her look younger, smaller, more innocent. And so
more like a victim.
Yeah, all that together leads to a jury to come back and find her not guilty. The other thing that could have been potentially important is if a lot of times, even though she was charged with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to police, the prosecution was very adamantly stuck on the first-degree murder. That's what they wanted. That's what they were going after. They ended its trial going find her guilty, and they could have spent more time with the other charges and those elements and really explain them to a jury to where they really could have understood and put more emphasis on the aggravated child abuse and aggravated manslaughter, because those all day long were what she did. I mean, even if you didn't believe the premeditated first-degree murder, because I think it is true. I do think that there's a possibility she did overdose her on chloroform or Xanax or something to maybe just seduce her. Yeah,
so she could go out.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I don't know if I would say that she set out to murder this girl, but I will tell you 100% the actions of that girl afterwards are enough for me to believe that whatever this woman did, she should be sitting in a jail cell for a very long time. Absolutely not. And the fact that she walked out, so she ends up being found not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and manslaughter of a child, not guilty. They find her guilty of 4 counts of providing false information to the police. They sentence her to 4 years. She had already been sitting in custody for 3 years. So the judge allowed her to be released on good behavior. Days later, she walked out. And I just remember thinking the world was a darker place, that woman was out and could potentially have more children. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out. Let us know. Follow, like, subscribe, all those other great things they say about YouTube, podcast, Facebook, Instagram, and our radio show. We thank you so much, and we hope that you're learning a little bit of nuggets that kind of empower you to understand what's happening with the law to kind of stop some of the confusion that takes place and the anger. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Legal Candy.